this computer was going. Okay, so it's mostly, so we're recording now, and so this is our, just for anyone viewing this, this is our, I'm Edwin Rutch, and this is our, I'd like to welcome everyone to our Empathy Cafe. This is for exploring the values that make up a culture of empathy and make up an empathic society. And just a quick intention statement. Our intention in this cafe is to create a culture of empathy. And in short, that means that everyone can openly and authentically express themselves as they wish, to feel heard and listened to and understood to their satisfaction. And for that to also happen mutually. And we do that with, oh, a lot of people joining now. And that happens with using mutual empathic listening. And let's see. So I put the, I'm going to put for the new people, I'm going to put the link in. You can add your name and contact info in this. And at the bottom of the page is a list of culture of empathy values. So this is a project that we've been working on to really articulate, because the core of what we're doing is trying to create a culture of empathy. And we use the empathy circle process as sort of the first step and gateway for that. And so this is a space to really talk about those values. Like we'd like to really explore them, you know, talk about them, be able to document them, and create a, you know, ideally I'd like to create a book. You know, we could create a book on what are the values of a culture of empathy, and kind of harvest everyone's insights about that. So let's see. So I think we're ready to I'm going to create the breakout rooms, and yeah, see, Terry, and you're muted.
Yeah, you said something about a link to put our contact info in.
Oh, in the chat, there's a chat. Let me put that in again. There's a little chat window. If you click the chat.
I've got the chat open. There's nothing in it.
Oh, okay. Should be, does he see it now?
Nope.
Oh, that's because I'm doing it. Sorry. Great. Thanks for flight. Yeah, somebody messaged me, and then it's going to them and not to the whole group. So I didn't, yeah, there we go.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and at the bottom of that page is a note-taking place to take notes too. So it looks like we can have 3 circles, and I'm going to, let me see here. Who do we have to facilitate? Okay, does someone who's taken the training want to explain the process, how it works for anyone that's new? Because I need to create the breakout rooms here. So anybody volunteer? Pavel, Anish, okay, you're up.
I thought that you asked for the new trainees.
That's you.
Well, go for it.
Yeah, sure.
Go for it, Pavel. If you want.
You mean to explain?
Yeah, just explain. How does this work? How does the empathy circle process work?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Anish, you can do it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pavel. We're going to get into small groups of 4, 5, or 6, depending on how many of us are there. And once we get into the smaller groups, we're going to get into a structured form of dialogue, which we call as the empathic process or empathic listening process. It's structured in a way because we have 3 roles that exist primarily within a circle. One is that of an active speaker, the other is of an active listener, and the third and the fourth people could be passive or silent listeners. Now, whoever feels inspired to start the circle could start, and that person automatically becomes the active speaker. Once you feel that you're willing to start, you can then ask anyone or one particular person if they would like to listen to you. If the other person agrees, then that person chooses to become the active listener. and the remaining people in the circle then assume the role of silent listeners. Usually we do it for a certain period of time when we are speaking and listening with one person. It's anything between 3 to 5 minutes. I don't know what the circle will look like today. So in your allotted time of 3 or 5 minutes, whichever is the case, you get to share whatever is alive in you, or you get to share what you would like to talk about with the theme of the day or the question of the day. While you're talking to your active listener, it's always nice to just ensure that the listener is also able to follow you and be with you. At the end of the day, we are trying to see if we can accompany each other in the dialogue process. So as an active speaker, you speak what you would like to share, and it's good to check with your active listener if they're following you. One of the ways you can do this is take a pause and let them know saying, I would like to pause, or I would like to hear a reflection. And that's an invitation for your active listener to reflect back what they have heard so far. If you feel what is reflected back to you is not exactly what you shared, please feel free to repeat yourself and get yourself to share again and check for a reflection. Please do this process as long as you feel you are heard or you've got the central idea reflected back from your active listener. That's the role of an active speaker. Once you are done talking, you can say, at this moment, I'm fully heard. Or at a moment where the timer, someone who is holding time in that circle, the facilitator maybe, show you a timing like this, then you can bring closure to the thought that you were sharing and get a reflection back. So that's the exchange that active speaker gets for those 5 or 3 minutes. As an active listener, what I'm bringing to the space is my presence and my listening. And whenever I am asked for a reflection, I can reflect back in my own words. You can do it in a few ways. You can summarize it, you can paraphrase it, or you can reflect back in your own words the essence of what the person spoke to you. Sometimes when people are talking, they may go too fast. So you can ask them to pause. That's the only time we are expecting you to interrupt the speaker, to say, hey, can you slow down? Or could you please repeat what you shared? And that's precisely the role of an active listener. The silent listeners, people who are listening to this exchange of dialogue, are there. You can take your notes, because sometimes when you're listening to somebody, something can come up for you. So when your turn comes, you can always bring it up and share with the circle. Now, how does your turn come? When the dialogue between active speaker and listener is over, the listener then assumes the role of an active speaker and can choose another person in the circle. You can choose the same person. Ideally, you would like to see that everyone gets a turn to speak. So you can pick up another person. Hey, would you like to listen to me? And go on for your 3 to 5 minutes. And we continue this process for an allotted period of time, which is 60 minutes or 90 minutes, based on how much time we set for ourselves. At any point of time, there is some deviation or challenge, it's okay. The facilitator who's going to be holding the space is also going to be an active speaker and listener, and will help us or support us if there is a need required there. That's the process. If I've missed on something, Pavel, maybe you can add on to it. I would really appreciate that, or any other questions. Thank you.
It was very well explained, Anish. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yes, Terry.
you're muted, Terry. Yeah.
Okay, are we going to use the hand signals? I agree, that's great, clarify.
Great question. Great question, Terry. Thank you so much. So one of the things that we are going to do in the circle is, whenever an active speaker is saying something, we are not coming from a space of whether we agree or disagree with what the speaker is saying. All that we are doing is we are just listening to what the speaker is bringing to the front. So thank you so much for the question. So we are not agreeing, disagreeing. We are not trying to be curious about what do you mean by that. So no interrogative or more questions. The only question that we are asking for is for a clarification question, that have I heard you right? And that's the only format that we're looking. So another thing is no giving solutions, no fixing problems. We're just coming here with our presence to listen to the other person. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, and you'll pick it up in the circle too, with the facilitator. Yes, Sophia?
Yeah, I also thought that was an excellent explanation, but I want to add that you can also interrupt the speaker if they are talking too long and it's too much for you to reflect back. So you can say, can you stop so I can reflect? And that is also okay. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So question, Pavel, will you facilitate in a circle? Are you willing to? Okay, and Dean, are you good with that? Cool, okay. So we'll have 3 circles and I'll facilitate the first one, Dean the second one, and Pavel the third one. So we're ready to go, and we're gonna go for, let's see, an hour. We're gonna go an hour and 15 minutes. No, an hour, we go for a quarter till, what is that, one and a half hours, I think.
Edwin,
Right.
don't forget to give permission to.
Oh, to record, right. Somebody didn't want to be in a recorded one, so that's the second one. Dean, we don't need to record that one. And let's see, Pavel, do you want to try recording?
Yes, sure.
Okay, then let me check with Pavel. So making you a co-host, so you should be able to record. Okay, good. Then so if you want to try recording yours, and then Dean will not record his. Okay, we're headed to the rooms. See you there. Okay, so everyone here is familiar with the process. I can keep time. I've got the timer, so whoever wants to start, take it away.
I'm happy to start. So, Bill, will you listen to me, please?
Happy to, Anish. How
Yeah.
you doing? Feeling better? I'm breaking the rules here. You feeling?
So I could begin by saying that I'm feeling very well. A bit tired because physically I could use some rest, but apart from that, I have recovered from whatever I had a couple of weeks ago. So thank you for asking.
Sure. I'm listening.
Yeah, I am so excited about what's happening around the topic of empathy circles and empathic connection and empathic dialogues. I seem to be involved in so many circles which is talking about empathy, and then I also got to sneak peek into the resource that Edwin has been creating for years, and I suddenly felt like Alice in Wonderland. Like it's just a very, very fascinating world for me. I'll pause.
Okay. So you were really excited about this whole idea and the topic of, principles and things. You've been in other empathy discussions, but you feel that this is more exciting for you, more engaging. That I feel that this process, the empathy circle process, there's a sort of experiential part of it that may be missing that I might be reading in there. And that then you went to Edwin's webpage, and it was like a cornucopia of like empathy stuff, and you really felt like a kid in a candy store, to use an American.
Yeah, thank you. So most of it is reflected back fine. There's just one piece which I wanted to clarify once again, so that around the globe, there seems to be a kind of movement where people are talking about empathy, connection, or compassionate connection, and they're using different words. And this is where my interest gets very alive, at what are we really talking about? At the end of the day, what do we really mean? And that's when the resource that Edwin shared kind of became absolutely a beautiful experience to just dive into it. And so I have a lot to chew on. I'll have a lot to read on in the days to come.
So there's a lot of talk around empathy, but the definition is somewhat loose. What do we really mean? And so when you're able to go into Edwin's resources, you really start to get some deeper understanding, and you're having a lot of fun and appreciation about that.
Yeah. I don't know deeper, but yes, a lot more understanding than much more wider understanding. Deeper, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay.
There's so many aspects to empathy around the world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you wanted to correct me and say that you get a wider, and the jury's out on deeper.
Yes, absolutely. When I think of empathy, I also want to, so I am also going to think like a consultant because that's what I professionally do. And I'm going back to thinking, what kind of behaviors do we actually call to be a part of a culture of empathy while we're talking about values, but what are the behaviors, actions, which are visible, which bring in or which build this culture of empathy? And that's something very, very fascinating to me at this moment.
So you're reflecting on your professional life as a consultant, and that's a comfortable, or that's a way that you, one of the ways you look at the world. And then you're looking at, well, talking about empathy is one thing, but what are the actions that help bring about that empathy experience, as best I can say it, and looking into specific actions that would create that effect.
Yeah. And now when I think of empathy, it looks like a very big umbrella. Like it looks like the master skill. Like it, and the best form of empathy that I have experienced in my life is silent present, just silence and reflecting nonverbal cues of what I'm really feeling. So felt presence, as Edwin says, that's the most beautiful way that I've experienced empathy. And I've also experienced other forms of empathy where I have heard it cognitively, I've heard it emotionally, I've heard it in terms of feelings and needs. So I am now thinking of different kind of skills that come along, the micro, mini, or the macro skills that actually build this entire thing called as empathy. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Okay, so so you've experienced empathy in different sort of formats. Mostly, you talked about silent empathy, but you have seen when people are talking, and you've heard it in people's voices and things like that. And you're trying to create a bridge between all those experiences that you've had where you felt that you were empathized with or things like that, or you were able to give empathy, and then start to look at the, the physical conditions, the actions and behaviors that support such communication.
Yeah. So yeah, at this moment I feel heard, and I'm happy to start.
Okay, sure. Okay, Aoife, would you listen to me?
Yes, I'm listening.
So what I've been musing about empathy is defined that it can be over-defined. I'll stop there.
You're reflecting on the reality that empathy can be over-defined. There is such
I'm sorry, that's my opinion. I think it might be reality, but who knows? But I think, yes, I think it's real that sometimes empathy can be over-defined. And so empathy is an experience. And then the other thing that I see while we've been working on this, and we talk about the values of empathy, and which are essentially the internalized ideals, and then the principles of empathy is how do you, as Anish said, how do you then act to bring about those ideas? And I'll stop there.
Okay, so the first thing was that you were saying that it's your opinion, but that it's over.
It can be. It can be.
Yeah, sometimes. And that's been your experience. And also that there's two aspects to it, that you're focused on the values and the principles. So to remember that it is a felt experience first, and then there's the values, which seem to be an inner thing, and then the principles, it seems to be more of an external active.
Right. And then the next thing that occurs to me when I said it could be over-defined, in other words, I think that a feeling of empathy, when I receive empathy, I feel empowered to go in any direction. In other words, I don't feel constrained by the person who's given me empathy or by some, obviously, I'm not going to all of a sudden fly away. There's some limiting factors. But there's an openness. In other words, there's an embracing of the unknown and the possibilities. And if you over-define those possibilities, then sometimes you can lose, as Anish said, that sense of wonder. I'll stop there.
So you're feeling into this thing that we're calling empathy, this experience, and it has this kind of quality of liberation, of like not like a, you know, flying away and ungrounded kind of liberation, but a very nourishing feeling of openness. And if it's kind of analyzed into abstraction, that could get lost. The magic of it could get lost.
Yeah. I always think of the sort of an analogy, rough analogy, about the you keep on going halfway. You measure the door. You go into a door or a wall, whatever it is, and you keep on going halfway and measuring, and you get to a billionth or whatever, but you never get to the wall. And so at a certain point, that's what I mean by overanalyzing. You're just, hyper, vigilant, and somehow you lose the experience or the gestalt. I'll stop there.
So the actual felt experience of this,
You don't have to go through the whole analogy.
But a quote is coming to my mind, so I'm just wondering.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah. So I think it was Wordsworth or Blake said, "We murder to dissect."
Right.
That there's this sense that you're actually, the more you measure, the more you can actually kill something. So yeah, you're just aware of that.
Right.
Like it was something else, but it's gone now.
That's okay. It probably wasn't that important. So yeah. So and in order to help, and we talk about facilitation, in order to help people be able to kind of take off into the unknown or trust that, I think you have to, I don't know, they have to feel compassion. And I'll stop there, and my time is up.
So in order, as a facilitator, to create to give your kind of input to the situation so that can happen for somebody else, there has to be this comfort, or this sitting in the unknown and letting that be comfortable even in the discomfort of it.
Yes. Yeah, you provide some support for that. Thank you, Aoife. I feel fully heard.
Okay, thanks, Phil. James, would you listen to me?
Listening.
So, yeah, it's very, this analyzing, well, it is the theme of the circle, is, the qualities of, or the, what is it? Because I think the way my mind works is that it's quite good at analyzing, but it's also quite good at going off into the clouds. So it can get I can just see all the facets of things, and it actually doesn't feel very pleasant.
So analyzing, although it is the purpose or theme that we're gathered here for, you do that, you go into your head, and it doesn't feel pleasant right now to do that.
Yeah, and a question came up for me just at the beginning of this circle, which I think that's where I'm feeling into, rather than analyzing what is it, it's too abstract. The question came up for me is, like, why be empathetic? That it's very, why, I'm sure there's dysfunctional empathy, and I'm sure I'm very good at it.
Yeah, the question came up at the beginning of this circle. Why be empathetic?
Like, why? Oh, go on.
Well, you said you're sure that you can sometimes be dysfunctionally empathetic.
Yeah, so the proof is in the pudding, I suppose, if you know that saying in America, the proof is in the pudding, that this quality that Bill was saying about, you know, providing this kind of this sounding board for people to have that feeling of liberation, and, you know, you're not alone, and that you can move on, that of freedom. Like, to me, that's the test of whether it's empathy, or whether it's empathy that's wanting to connect and wanting to cultivate compassion, or whether it's in the realm of manipulation.
So the proof is in the pudding. Determining whether something is empathy or manipulation is the experience that one has being received with that empathy, if they feel authentic sense of freedom and compassion.
Yeah, and like I was talking to Edwin earlier about, you know, just how I really enjoy that the facilitator participates. And I think that that is one of the things that stops it from turning into, and I want to stop, I like the way you did that, I want to stop calling it dysfunctional empathy and just call it manipulation, because that's what it is. You're not doing it, we're not doing it. That's the feeling I get, is that we're not making that liberation happen, we're facilitating it. Not even, sorry, maybe do that wee bit, Tanel.
So you like that the facilitators participate, and you think that well, that's important, that helps with making it real for the whole group, and you're preferring to use the word manipulation rather than dysfunctional empathy. That gets more to the heart of it.
Yeah, because I know that well, what we're doing here is, there's the two things I would hope we want to connect with each other as human beings. Rather than manipulate each other into a false sense of security or something. I don't know, something about that.
You hope that we are here to connect as human beings rather than to manipulate each other into a false sense of security.
Yeah. Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay. Edwin, would you listen to me?
Listening?
I'm thinking right now about let me make it specific and let me own it. My own ability to assess my capacity for listening to someone, being receptive to someone, being able to accurately assess that ability versus wanting to be very receptive and not having the capacity, and then failing to receive someone with empathy.
So you're sensing into yourself to see your capacity to actually listen empathically versus a desire to listen empathically.
Yes, because I know that everyone has a limited capacity. It's just humans. We are not infinitely receptive to differences, and especially in this community where we have a shared goal of being receptive and empathic, it's easy to see why some people, including myself, would be overeager and say, yes, I'm receptive, talk to me. I'll hear you openly with an open heart. And then, but in reality, I'm not receiving. I'm not open. I'm not capable of doing it. And again, to make it more concrete, I'm experiencing that right now, where I feel that I'm just on the edge of having the ability to be authentically receptive, and then with the potential of closing down because of being beyond my capacity.
Mm-hmm. So you're just noticing in yourself, you're sort of on this edge of being able to be open and receptive and take in, but it might be just beyond your capacity, and you're feeling you could shut down.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I would name that in terms of a value for a culture of empathy, but it has something to do with like connecting to reality rather than living in a fantasy about what I, the person that I'd like to be versus the person that I am, the reality of who I am.
So you're seeing that somehow relates to sort of wishing who you were, something about imagining or wishing who you were compared to who you really are. So kind of a sense of wanting to connect maybe to who you really are.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the best word for it is, but I would want a culture of empathy to be grounded in reality and not in a fantasy.
And would like reality versus, fantasy.
Yeah. And along that line, so the reality of what's happening here in this group is that there's some unspoken tension. There's some things that I've not spoken. And the reason for me not speaking them is for the intention of taking responsibility for my own capacity rather than just acting without considering my capacity and then expecting others to hold me.
So there's something about there's tensions here in this group, and you're really trying to hold it yourself. See your capacity for holding that tension.
Taking responsibility for my capacity, knowing my capacity, and acting within my best estimate of my capacity.
So it's taking responsibility for your own actions and your own capacity. I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not getting that.
It's good enough, and I notice I'm at time. So thank you, Edwin.
Great. Okay, then speak to Bill.
Speaking, listening, sorry.
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me around this, the values of empathy is sort of being able, the culture of empathy is the term values and principles. And so I see this as sort of looking at the values and the principles of a culture of empathy. And I think, having a sort of a distinction between those two is helpful.
So in exploring this and trying to define it, you're looking at the values and principles, and you find that those two distinctions are helpful in understanding it.
And so the values is, those essences like we talked about, mutuality or empathy or integration, etc. Like they're usually like a one word sort of an essence of maybe a felt experience that we value. Like, it could be sort of integrating different parts. I think empathy through the empathic dialogue, we sort of integrate different parts of ourselves. So there's sort of this integration that happens. You can sort of feel that integration, and that's like a value. Oh, I value that integrating of differences. So that would be a value, for example, integration.
Okay, I'm going to stop you.
That was a lot.
Yeah. And so we're talking about values here. And essentially there, in a value, it's broad, there's an essence. In other words, there's a sort of dynamism to it. Yeah, and you refer also as the felt experience. So there's an essence.
Yeah,
You're talking
an
about
essence.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry. Good. Yeah.
And there's so there's that, and then there's the principle, which is some kind of a rule or manifestation of that. So, for example, one principle I have is being willing to dialogue with anyone. So be willing to dialogue with anyone in an empathy circle. And yeah, so that's one principle of it.
Okay. So one principle you have is being willing to dialogue with anyone in an empathy circle. And that's a principle or an action that you feel, and I'm reading into this, but, supports and honors people's existence.
Yeah, their common humanity, which would be, I guess, would be another value. In fact, the common humanity, it would probably be the principle that stems from that would be willing to dialogue with anyone.
Right. So what you're referring back to is the value is common humanity, and then the dialogue with everyone is the principle that then, validates that.
And, in doing the empathy circles, there's been a lot, I've been trying to get different groups, different political groups together. And there's, people on certain areas, they say, no way am I going to dialogue with the other side because, it means that means I support them. It's just that there's so many reasons for not dialoguing with the other side. And I see that as sort of a block to empathy.
Okay. So in dealing with trying to get a lot of groups together, groups that are in conflict, there's a lot of blanket refusal because of assumptions about what dialogue would mean, how that would define them. And you think that's a block to empathy because it blocks the dialogue. Yeah,
it's like I'm not going to talk to them because they're totally evil, and I'm not going to support that, or they're not in good faith, or it's like, and then there's other ones that are like, if I speak, I don't want to give them attention, or so there's there's a lot of different excuses that kind of come up.
Okay, so people make accusations about other people, which you characterize as excuses, and you feel that then is a block to empathy.
Yeah, it happens on a broad political spectrum, and I won't point to the far left, but that's been my experience. It's
okay.
Yeah. So, and that's my time too. I feel fully heard.
Okay. So you won't point to the far left, but your experience with them is that many times they will refuse to dialogue.
Yeah, I feel heard.
Okay, great. Anish, will you listen to me? Oh, you're muted, Anish. There we go. Okay, great. All right. As a principle. Huh. Yeah. So kind of go off of what Edwin said. So dialogue, I certainly see dialogue as being a gateway towards a greater understanding. I'll stop there.
You're kind of continuing what Edwin said, and for you, dialogue is the starting point of any communication or connection.
Right. But people live in a very rich and varied world outside dialogue and outside of the empathy circle, and so there's some sort of continuance. So that's great. I agree with Edwin about dialogue and beginning, and then there needs to be actions that foster confidence in each other, in whoever is dialoguing. So there need to be action. So I don't know how to define that, but there are certain things that, actions that engender trust and a willingness to engage in dialogue, and then trust the fact that you're being heard and then also increases your capacity to hear others. I'll stop there.
Yeah. So you're stressing on the fact that why dialogue is the core essential part of the whole process.
Mhm.
There are also peripheral things which are extremely important for the dialogue to happen or to flow in a certain way, which can be the willingness to engage, the trust that you induce in the other person to come forward for the dialogue, and also the context in where the dialogue is happening.
Right. And again, sorry, Ed, when my job as a special, that's an in-joke, as a special education teacher, let's say there were many, many things involved in that we're talking about here that I won't go into detail about. But the way I judged myself, whether I was being effective, is whether the student was empowered, whether the student was able to go to a less restrictive setting, is what we call, in other words, a regular school instead of a special ed school, whether they were able to get a job. In other words, whatever they were able to do, they felt after being in my class, they got the skills and emotional support to, to flower. I'll stop there.
So one of the things that you're trying to highlight is that whenever I talk about capacity or willingness or capability, is to measure the output or what is the result of a process. In this example that you're saying is, as a special education teacher, one of the ways you would measure yourself or your own competence, skill, willingness is by looking at how well your students have done after they've gone through your class.
Yes, how well, and measured, it's really important that they should be more functional. In other words, they have more capacity and that they feel that way. So, in special ed, there's, drama that you wouldn't believe. A lot of anger at me, a lot of physical violence at me. But at the end of the day, the kids were more able to cope, were more in control of their own futures, and felt, better able to face the future. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. So for you, the real measure is if they came at a certain level, after going through the experience of the education of the class, at the end of the day, you're able to see or measure a delta in them where they're able to do something beyond what they could do before. So that difference kind of makes the measurement for what you're doing or bringing in. You're acknowledging this while there are so many things happening around, which may not be in line with the same thought that you have right now.
Right, and that was excellent. The only one thing that I would add, and then I'm done, is I looked at them to see whether they felt that way. And if they felt those are the two. I wanted to see, functionally, could they do this and that, but did they feel that way?
Okay.
Honoring their experience, and I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for repeating that once more. I did hear it. So what I did hear in the couple of times that you shared with me, that one of the ways you actually measure, you see them feeling the difference within themselves. So it's more of self-belief in them that tells you that there is a delta in them.
Yeah, that I did some good work. Thank you. I feel heard.
Thank you. James, would you listen to me, please?
Yes, happily listening.
Yeah. So I'm so happy with what I'm listening right now, like from how it started from you and where it went with Edwin and Bill. I'm seeing the common thread hinging on two things, which in my world, we call it as a skill and a will metrics, or as we call as capacity and capability. I'll pause.
Yeah, so you like what you're hearing so far. You're noticing a common thread, and you would call it a skill and a will capacity?
Yes, it's called the skill will matrix. And how they say is that I may have the skill and I may not have the willingness to do it. So it doesn't really make sense. I may have the will, but I don't have the skills to do it. So that also doesn't make sense. And it is in line with what you were saying, James, before, that a lot of people may have capacity. They may have the willingness. They may have the desire to do so. However, can they really do it? That's a thought that came into my head. I'll pause.
Okay, so it's a skill will matrix. some people can have the desire but not the skill, and vice versa.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then Edwin went on to talk about this and elaborated it, and Bill kind of brought it back to his own self-reflection, where he's saying that the way I measure my skill and my willingness is by looking at what is happening outside for the person who experienced my presence, whether it's through education or my empathic presence or whatever I said would happen between the two of us.
So Bill is looking outside of himself at the person about, based on his interaction with them, with the student he's working with, what is their skill level? He's looking at them, focusing.
Yeah, and when he sees that there is a skill difference or there is a difference in what they feel about themselves, it's also a measure of his own skill and will.
So based on where they're at, you see that he's taking that to be a reflection on his own willingness and skill level.
Absolutely.
In working there.
Yeah. So, which is what brings me to the whole topic of this thing, that one of the reasons I'm coming back to the circles is that though I have very high willingness, I realize that I still have to gather certain particular skills which kind of supports me in my willingness. I may have a willingness of 90 out of 100, but in terms of skills, I may only have 30% of skills. So that gap of 70% is what I'm very curious to cover by learning and practicing and learning from each other, and by doing it, and see how I can grow to hold more empathic spaces for others.
Mm-hmm. So being here, the reason what attracts you to coming back here is the ability to grow your skill, and then through growing your skill, you notice it's you increase your willingness to work, to hold empathy for people, because you know them.
Yeah. By default, my willingness is very high. I want to hold empathy space for as many people as I can, as often as I can. The question that I'm constantly asking myself is, what is a new skill that I have added to myself with the experiences that I'm having in order to match up to my willingness?
Yeah, you have a very high willingness to hold empathic spaces, and you want to accurately match that with your skill.
Yeah, and why it is important for me is that just by having willingness to hold empathic spaces may not be enough to create that culture of openness, trust, reliability, responsibility, all those values that you're talking about. So when I come with the intention that I want to create such spaces, I also need to take a lot of responsibility for my own work that I need to put in order to do that.
Yeah, the willingness is not necessarily sufficient. There's a number of other factors that allow you to be responsible for what you're inviting people into.
Yeah. And one last thought on this line, which is why a lot of times when I go for empathy, I sometimes realize that that's not really empathy. That's anything but empathy at this moment. And I think that's when I have to kind of bring in this value of compassion for the other person, that they have the willingness at this moment. It's just a matter of time that they pick up the skills. So my desire to engage with them becomes more and more open to myself. I'm willing to engage with them, even knowing that they are not giving me the exact empathy that I needed, because it's a shared reality of being a part of a empathic culture. I'll pause.
Yeah, so there are times when you get into a space, someone is purportedly being empathic with you. You don't recognize it as empathy, but you open up to their willingness. They're demonstrating a willingness, just not the skill, and that's enough for you to be with them, and because you trust that it's moving into increased skill and increased culture building that you want.
Yeah, thank you. I feel heard.
Right. Aoife, would you listen to me, please?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Yeah, I am on the same page with what Anish is describing very much. And it's humbling. It's humbling to notice my limits. I heard Edwin talking about the principle of dialogue, and it's sticking in me, because I'm very tempted to say that I also agree, because I love dialogue, but I find it hard to think of dialogue as a principle. I think of it as a strategy. And I know that I certainly don't want people to come, to my door and say, you said you agree with this principle, therefore I want to talk to you right now. And if not, if you don't agree, you're a hypocrite. You don't actually support dialogue. That doesn't work for me.
Okay, so you're saying that what Anish was just saying about capacity and skill resonated with you, and there's a humility in that. You're seeing that in yourself. Gives you a sense of humility, and then you recognize that the dialoguing is one of these principles of a culture of empathy. You're on board with that. You want to dialogue, but then
No, not exactly. I'm questioning whether dialogue is a principle. I'm wondering if it's actually a strategy. And so the humbling experience is noticing, like on that matrix that Anish is describing, I have limits to my willingness, I have limits to my skill. And noticing my limits is where it's humbling.
okay, so you don't see the dialogue, engaging in dialogue with another person as a principle. It's more of a strategy to you, and it's a strategy, and then that links up with this understanding of your own limitations when it comes to capacity and skill.
Yeah, I don't have a willingness to be in dialogue with anybody that wants to talk to me 24 hours a day. That's way beyond my capacity. Of course, I love dialogue, and I want to be there, and I want to be able to, I'm trying to work this out, because I don't know if it's a principle to say if availability is a principle, but there's a difference between making good faith attempts to be in dialogue and being available at any minute of the day for anybody. It's two different things. So I'm just trying to parse out where the principle is. I mean, I have the sense right now that we're all on the same page about this. I don't think anybody expects us to be available 24 hours a day to anybody. And so then it's just a matter of how do we articulate that?
So you're feeling into this, the capacity for the empathic dialoguing, and you can't see how anybody would be available for that 24 hours a day. You certainly aren't. So there's something about the boundary between availability and capacity.
I'll just, I don't know if somebody could give me a time check. I didn't start my timer, but
30 seconds.
I want to end by saying my sense is that what we're doing here right now in this specific circle is on the edges of like expanding capacity, but staying within a learning zone where I'm learning about my boundaries and about how to expand them without making it so uncomfortable that I can't learn from it. And so that's what I see happening. and I'm happy about that because I want to learn. I want to grow my capacity.
So within this circle in particular, what's happening here in that we're all moving into the discomfort, into the expansion, and you're acknowledging that there's you don't want to lose your capacity in that. You don't want to go beyond your capacity to actually learn.
Yes, I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Edwin, would you listen to me?
Listening.
There's a sense, and I wonder, is it a gender thing, of you're all kind of, I can understand what you're saying and I can kind of follow it, but I feel like I'm not really, it's triggering insights in me that are not in that, whatever that is, that like I understand capacity and skill, but for me it's quite, yeah, so maybe start with that.
Okay, if I understand, it's that from the discussion, you're sort of hearing what we're talking about, but sort of not really getting it, not really. Maybe it's not, you're not really feeling it, or I don't know if.
No, I'm getting it. I understand it, but it's not alive for me. I understand it's not alive for me.
Yeah. You're getting it. You're understanding it, but it doesn't have life for you. Yeah, and yeah. So for me, it's more like I'm just going to make hand signals. It feels like you're kind of like all kind of in this, and then I'm kind of like that. I just don't, I can see it and I can understand it, and I suppose in trying to understand the different way of looking at the world, I've been around men my whole life, so, but for me it feels like the capacity and the skill thing, I don't know that I'm not framing it like that. It's more like I'm a meditator and I have been for 15 years very seriously. So and compassion, loving kindness meditation is part of that. So, and then my cultural conditioning as a woman, where there is this dysfunctional empathy, there's this hundreds of years of the cultivation of empathy as a survival skill. So for me personally, in these circles, I think I'm getting something different out of it. It seems, it's constantly changing, but I do feel like there's something else going on here for me. So you feel there's something else going on here in this circle, and it's 4 males and 1 woman, and that's for a long time women have developed empathy, been more empathic. I'm sure struggling a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah, the felt experience is that from the empathy circles for me is not that I'm expanding my skill or my capacity for empathy. I'm actually expanding my self-confidence and my boundaries. So my right to have time to be listened to take up space.
Oh, so what you're really getting from the empathy circles is that here you have time and space for you to share and to be heard, and that's giving you a deeper confidence just in general.
Yeah, and so I can, it's not all about you lot. You're not interrupting me. you know, and it's incredibly liberating to, yeah, I enjoy the empathy, and I love, like, to me, compassion is the most deeply healing quality and skill. And I know that, but yeah, that wouldn't be the main thing that's going on for me here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so compassion and some of these other things are, you know, are out there, but really what's meaningful for you, so you're kind of tapping into what's really meaningful, is just to have this space where you can feel heard and understood, and there's space for you for that.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people don't, well, I've been in openness, I know a lot of people don't like to talk about the masculine and feminine differences, but I do see that there's something about the masculine being of service that is very nourishing to the world. You know, that the, you know, being quiet and reflecting, I suppose going into the yin, into the reflective kind of mode, it's a bit more balanced maybe.
So you're seeing different qualities of the yin and yang, or kind of this balance of going into a reflective mode too. It's kind of the value of a reflective mode.
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. I feel.
Okay, speak to Anish.
Listening.
Yeah, I felt I wasn't quite hearing well there. So I don't know what it was. I just, yeah, I just felt I wasn't doing a good job of really getting what Aoife was saying.
Yeah, you're kind of saying how you felt you could have done it differently, and at this moment you feel that you didn't quite hear what Aoife was saying. You wanted to reflect it back as you would like to.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm not even sure where really to go. I guess with the dialogue, you know, I'd mentioned the principle of a dialogue willing to dialogue with everyone, but there are conditions around that. I mean, there's like, you know, scheduling, time, you know, kind of issues. There's this broad principle, but there's a lot of nuances that are actually sort of boundaries to that principle. I think it's more, yeah, so it's more of an intention, like, you know, not to just categorically block people, you know, just it's saying, well, I'm willing to dialogue if, you know, if there's time, if there's space, you know, and all the issues that are involved. And then if you have like 1 million people who suddenly want to dialogue with you, you know, that's a pretty long queue. So,
yeah. So you're going back to the whole principle of dialogue, and what you're trying to explain yourself is, or us again, is that for you, while it is a principle, as a principle, it comes with other bylines. It's not complete in itself. Like there is willingness, there's availability, there is scheduling, and all of that also comes along with it while you're trying to look at it as a principle. So yeah, that's what you're trying to share.
and then I'm thinking about this quality of, you know, tapping into the felt experience that I have. So if I sense myself, I do feel sort of a lot of my awareness sort of in my mind, kind of in this area right now. So sort of a kind of looking for the relationships and sort of a, you know, kind of a focus. And so that's kind of the felt experience. If I'm talking about the felt experience I have at the moment.
And you're right now reflecting about your felt experience, which is right now more in the head about how we are relating to one another and what's really happening. And that's the experience that is alive in you at this moment.
That's what I'm sensing. Yeah, it's sort of that focus and concentration. Yeah. And then for some reason, I think of what James was saying was, well, there's fantasy and reality, you know, sort of this notion of fantasy and reality. And that, you know, with the empathy circle, you can empathize with someone's fantasy, right? It's like, it's open. You can do whatever you want. If you want to live in a world of fantasy, I'm glad to empathize with your fantasies. I'm willing to hear your fantasies.
Yeah. So before you got into this example, you just wanted to stress on the fact that at this moment, what you're sensing is that you're putting a lot of effort to focus and bring your attention here. And then you went on to quote and go back to what James was talking about, reality and fantasy. And your view on this is that in an empathic space or a dialogue, if the other person wants to go into fantasy, so be it. I'm just going to follow that person and be with them in their fantasy. And that's how you understand it.
Because your fantasy is as real as your reality, right? There's the reality of your felt experience of your fantasies, right? Fantasy probably has a lot of feelings to it, right? The fantasy feels good. It's good to just kind of fantasize about, things too. It feels good.
Yeah.
So there is a reality to fantasy, I guess.
Yeah. And how you see it at this moment is that when somebody is sharing their fantasy or explaining their fantasy or talking about or bringing their fantasy in front, that is real for them because it has emotions and it has thoughts and it has sensations attached to it. So it's as real for them, even though it is a fantasy.
Yeah. And then I guess there's something else about the felt experience is like, can we be sort of in a, looking at sort of concepts, or how do we go more into the felt experience? Because the empathy for me is sort of sensing into felt experience. So I'm always sitting with like, how do I be more sensitive to what it is that I'm feeling? And sort of, I just kind of sit with that question.
Yeah. So the question that comes into your head is, even though I understand what is happening at this moment and I can comprehend by putting my focus and attention, how do I really feel it within my body? How do I get to experience it in my body of what is really happening in front of me right now?
Yeah, feel fully heard, and that's my time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I suddenly realize, okay, sorry. Fifi, sorry. Has Bill got it done yet? Okay. Bill, may I speak to you, please?
Sure.
Yeah. Bill, what I'm sensing at this moment is I'm realizing what happened to Edwin right now is something that I'm experiencing now, is that I realize that my ability to listen with focus and attention is really being pushed to the limit. And I'm sensing maybe because there is too much of intellectual conversation going on right now. So it's really drawing a lot of energy, and it is midnight here where I am right now.
So in listening to Edwin, you're having a hard time paying attention because of the intellectual complexity and things like that. So, and it's late there, I'll stop there. You add or correct, please.
Yeah. No. So at this moment, I'm hoping that there's some lightness around it. So and I still want to honor and hold the space for what is coming. So I would like to say that I'm finished and pass it on to you.
Okay. So you're sensing sort of a dynamic, and you're finished, and you'd like to pass it on to me.
Yes.
And there was something else that I'm missing in there?
No.
No? Okay.
So I would like it to continue, whichever form is taking, and I'm happy to step back and just witness what is evolving out of it.
Okay. So you're feeling that you're ready to end speaking, but are very interested in witnessing the dynamic that's going on here.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Okay, good. James, would you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking about, intellectual as opposed to emotional, states of being, but then also I'm adding to that actual, I'm making up a word. Basically, what am I saying? All right, let me stop there and give me a sense to try to figure out what that third thing is. So go ahead.
You're connecting to emotional states, intellectual states, and then some third that you started to call actual.
Yeah, right. Thanks. You went too far with me on that one. What I mean is, I guess what the thing is talk the talk, walk the walk. In other words, there's something that's deeper that goes beyond just our what we perceive in our emotions or feel and what we understand. and there's a much greater reality that surrounds us. So we sort of have to bring it into that reality. And we have to take our emotional feelings and our cognitive understanding, bring it into that greater reality. And, and that's always going to be a challenge. And I'll stop there.
So there's a reality outside of our thoughts and feelings, and it's important to find ways to bring ourselves into that reality, and that's always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, because it does require a certain amount of letting go and being open to an experience and looking at things in new ways, while kind of, to me, kind of walking in the parameters of compassion and empathy, I would say.
So the challenge is bringing ourselves into actualizing something, and also living the principles of doing it in a way that's compassionate.
Yeah, what I do is I try to like set up a feeling. Am I feeling compassionate? Am I acting compassionate? Check it out with reality, see what other people are kind of reflecting back to me. And then kind of like letting it go and letting myself kind of be as spontaneous as I can. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, so in order to do that, you take in feedback about how you're doing it from other people. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Thank you, James. I feel fully heard.
Okay. Edwin, would you listen to me?
I'm listening.
Yeah. What Bill just said makes a lot of sense to me. That's also how I think of it. I tend to think about thinking and feeling and action as these three different things that are that I try to integrate and consider, that are part of me, that are not, each of them are not the same, they're not, they're separate, they're distinct in some way.
So you're resonating with what Bill said, that there's thinking, feeling, and action. There are three different things that you try to integrate, or
Yes.
they're distinct though.
Yes. And I'm aware that my feeling side is, I often neglect it, especially in this context where I'm looking at my laptop. It's really easy to forget about my feelings side and get pulled into my head. And I had the impression that, I think that's what Anish said also, and that's even how I was interpreting Aoife's feeling of disconnect from us four men, was something about us being in our heads very much.
So you're sensing that it's about us being in our heads, and maybe as men we're more in our heads, that also the technology, just looking at this screen, kind of puts you more into your head, and you're just kind of looking at that quality.
Absolutely. I think I'm supportive of the idea of making an effort to connect to my feelings more, pulling energy out of the other two areas and connecting to my feelings. Really, I feel like it changes dynamics very, very directly. And even as I say that, I notice that I'm very much in my head right now. That as I bring my attention more to my feelings, felt experience, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, so you noticing that you're more in your head right now, and that if you bring your energy and attention to your feelings, there's a feeling of discomfort there.
Yes, yes. And I also noticed that I have a temptation to explain the why, and that is also taking me away from my felt experience.
And you're noticing that if you explain the why of what's happening, that will actually take you away from your experience.
My felt experience.
Your felt
yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Sounds like a feeling of dilemma or something.
No, actually, it feels quite good because I'm noticing the impulse, but I'm not acting on it, and it actually feels good to connect to the discomfort.
So it feels good to disconnect with that feeling of discomfort.
Connect. I don't know. I heard
Oh,
you say
to connect with that feeling of discomfort.
Yeah. I feel fully heard.
Okay. Then speak to Aoife.
I'm listening.
In terms of this, this sense of, oh, we're in our heads, that, you know, you hear a lot in these workshops, you know, get out of your head, get into your heart kind of thing, you know, or speak from your heart, not your head. So you hear that in a lot of these workshops.
So you're reflecting on this head-heart thing, and you've heard a lot this idea that you need to get out of your head and into your heart in different work.
And I always get irritated. I feel irritated by it because I say in the empathy circles, speak from any part of your body that you want to. You know, it's like, if you want to speak from your head, speak from your head. If you want to speak from your heart, speak from your heart. If you want to speak from your ass, speak from your ass. You know, speak from any part of your body that you would like to.
And you're affirming that all is welcome here, all body parts, whatever you want to speak from, and that head, heart, whatever is welcome.
And the quality of speaking from the head is usually this feeling. There's a feeling to speaking, you know, from the head. There's a felt experience of sort of constriction, contraction, maybe rigidity, but it has it has a felt experience. So we can actually speak of the felt experience of speaking from our heads, because there is, I don't see, it is a feeling as well.
And following on with your head rights, talking about the rights of the head, that it is actually within the scope of the felt experience. There's a feeling of constriction, of focus, contraction, I think.
Yeah, this relationships, what are relations, you know, and there's a lot of verbal quality to it. You know, that's not a feeling, verbal. But I guess I'm trying to name the felt experience of speaking from the head.
So you're bringing the verbal capacity we all have into this felt experience of headiness.
Yeah, and I can feel it in my own self. Like there's a quality of kind of like constriction, and my awareness is in sort of this space here, and there's a sort of a feeling of, yeah, like constriction of it. And in some sense, the constriction actually feels good. You know, it feels good to kind of constrict. You know, if you just really constrict and then you kind of let go, it feels good to have that quality of constriction. I enjoy it. It's like constriction and letting go is actually, it feels like, I mean, it kind of, yeah, constriction, then the letting go, it kind of gives a tingling quality in my body.
So the feeling for it for you is this constriction, contraction, and release, contraction, release. And it's actually within that movement between the two that this was like a relationship, that it feels good. Do you like that there's an energy to it and it feels natural?
Yeah, it feels like when I release, then it feels kind of tingly, kind of this part of my body tingles. And actually, one thing, you know, I had done in other circles is like when you share, when you do your share what you want to share, you say what your feeling is, and you have a physical motion of it. So, and then everybody mirrors that physical emotion. So you get more into the body, you know, like if there's like kind of this is a feeling that I'm kind of feeling, everybody gives to get the reflection, you get a physical reflection of it, you know, so yeah.
So you have this with the contraction release, then it leads to this tingly feeling within the rest of your body, which is pleasant, so worth it. And then in the other circles that you've done, you have this thing where you get people to express how they're feeling in some kind of movement. So whatever that is, the people make the movement and then everybody else reflects that back. So there's an empathic body nonverbal expression of the felt experience.
Yeah, exactly. I feel fully heard. There's more, but my time's up.
So you have a lot more to say, but sorry. So Anish, would you listen to me?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a lot in this. I'm really glad that Edwin said that about the head thing, because I wasn't anti-head. It just wasn't resonating with me right now.
Yeah, so you're kind of glad that Edwin acknowledged what he said, because you're not against head or you're not anti-head, and it was nice to hear what he shared. Yeah.
Yeah, I like my head.
Yeah, you like your head.
It's been very useful so far. So this is really fascinating now for me because it links up with a lot of my work in like the mindfulness world of, and then looking, we were talking about earlier about the therapeutic relationship. And I do think in neuroscience has brought us a lot of really wonderful validation for spiritual truths that have been here for that are biological, you know, Mother Nature made them. But one of the misinterpretations I see is a very, that all these therapeutic processes now are about shutting down the fight, flight, freeze, the stress response.
Yeah, so what I hear you say is that whatever you heard from Edwin kind of really connects with you, resonates with you, especially with the work that you've been doing around mindfulness. And the whole concept of therapeutic dialogue is not just the only way of reaching to that mindfulness or that healing process, which has been there for thousands of years. There are other ways as well, which has been scientifically proven or validated now more and more.
Yeah, but the main thing I want to say is I disagree that we are meant to be shutting down the stress response. And I think a lot of therapists now, a lot in the mindfulness world, it's being misused as a way to subdue something that is actually a vital, wild essence in us all that we have a right to. And I feel very passionate about it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that again. So according to you, the flight, fight, freeze response, the stress system that is there, which is an evolutionary part of it, part of us has a very deep meaning. And in modern day therapeutic spaces, we are taught, or mindfulness spaces, we are taught to subdue it or not to honor it. And you have serious questions about the practice.
Yeah, because within, and I think that's what Edwin was saying about like this contraction release, like within that, I find that's where your intuition lives, and that's where maybe empathy lives. You know, this is me, this is you, this is me, this is you, you know, this is me, this is you. And that kind of, yeah, maybe that's.
Yeah. And especially because you believe that it is in this contraction and constriction where the magic lies of empathy and connection, to have this understanding and this realization that this is you and this is me, and then this back and forth is what makes us alive and what makes it more meaningful.
Yeah, and I'm afraid of you. Oh, I don't need to be afraid of you. I'm afraid of you. So it's like in any of these dialogues, we could be being triggered and soothed, triggered and soothed. And in that stress response actually is getting a wee workout.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're giving the example of the threat perception that I'm scared of you, and to come back to realizing that I'm not scared of you, and then again going back to that response system where I'm scared of you, and then coming back to this realization I'm not scared of you, and this is where it all lies, and this is the space that you really like to explore more or understand more or know more.
Experience more personally, and then offer that for other people, that even in speaking the unspeakable, the world didn't fall apart.
Mm.
And what that's in that center of the brain, like what, it's like, then that, I won't go too deep, but how that dissolves your sense of self, then your sense of, being a protected little shell, a lonely little shell.
Yeah, could you please repeat that again? I lost a part of it.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear it well. Yeah.
So when you're speaking the unspeakable, what you deem to be like your worst. So in this circle format, I think people could do that, if it's not being recorded maybe. And then it's being met. So the fear is so triggered, then it's being met with compassion, with empathy. And it's like, it dissolves that false sense of self, of being protected, like completely lonely and protected in a shell. It dissolves that.
I'll try doing that. I'll try to reflect that. So what I hear is that when I allow myself to say what I would probably not say, and I'm met with compassion and empathy, it gives me an opportunity to go back and see that the protected self of me was not really needed. I could embrace it more and more. So that's what I understood from what you shared. Wow. Edwin, can I speak to you?
Listening.
Okay. I am suddenly so awake because now we are back onto a subject which I can relate and understand, and I have my 2 cents to add to that as well.
Okay, we've hit a topic that really resonates with you, and you're feeling awake and have ideas, something to share about it.
Yeah. So I have been doing my own work as an experiential educator, and I've always been talking about, as a facilitator, what Bill was saying much earlier, when our participants come into the workshop, how do I measure the success of the learning program or the training? One is that I can get them to fill in a survey form and say, hey, did you like it? Most people like the venue and the menu and they give great ratings. But does that really translate into effective learning is the question that I've often asked.
So you're really wondering in your training, how do you measure effectiveness in terms of learning?
Yeah. And often I have found that when people are able to come up with 1 or 2 things that they found as their aha moment, and for the reasons they found it to be an aha moment for themselves, sometimes has even surprised me, because I wasn't even thinking about what they were going to say, but they felt that it was their experience. They went through it without even me thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. So when people share what their learnings were, their learnings were like totally off somewhere else compared to what you were sort of imagining or even thinking about.
Yeah. And the example that I want to bring is one of my first learning assignments that I did. I took people for a nature walk, and we started climbing at 4 in the morning when it was pretty dark, and we were climbing up a steep hill. And we went to the top of the hill. By then, the sun started rising. That was one of the first experiences I had with a group of 40 people.
So one of the project or trainings you did is you went up this hill to see the sunrise with the whole group.
Yeah. And when the group reached on top, it was monsoons. The cloud was clearing up. The sun was rising. And a couple of people came up and said, "Oh shit, this is so high. And I have fear of heights. I would have never climbed this place if it was during daytime."
So some people were saying they had this fear because they're pretty high up. They had a fear of heights, but doing it at night, they were able to do it. They wouldn't have done it though during the day.
Yeah. And what is interesting is when we went up, we actually walked through such narrow paths that there was only space for one person to walk in, and they couldn't really see where they were walking. And we were walking through the forest. We trekked pretty high. We climbed about 2,000 feet in those 2 hours.
So they had limited view of what they could see. They couldn't see the things that they were afraid of, which were just like to the side. So kind of the quality of not seeing what you're afraid of.
Yeah. And then when the sun came up and they had to come down, they refused to come down because they said, "I cannot walk this path because it is too scary. I'm too scared to walk this path."
So the same path, they wouldn't go that same path because they could see all the dangers on that path.
Yeah. And that was an aha moment for me as a facilitator, to know that they walked the same path. There was no other way that we went up. We went the same path. But now that they can see the fear, the conditioning of whatever childhood trauma or pain or experiences they have had became so alive in them by the trigger that now they are not able to embrace the same situation which they did joyfully a few hours ago.
So it's a real learning for you that if people are walking down a path and they don't, it's the same path, but if they see the fears, then it affects them differently. If they don't see the fears, they have a different experience and are capable of sort of taking that route. And that was like a real aha moment. So
Yeah. And the reason I'm bringing the story up from such a past is that when James was talking about, and James Bill talked about feeling, thinking, and action, I realized that there was more to it beyond just that. And when I started learning about it, I came across one of the professors who's done a lot of work around this. And he talks about 6 dimensions.
So this quality, these 3 different areas of feelings, thinking, and actions that you've just heard some sort of research about that.
And this person goes on to talk about it, and he's been writing a lot about it. His name is Colin Beard, and he says there are 6 dimensions to a human being. And one of them is thinking, one of them is feeling, so bang on, we are there. And the third is action, which is the doing. The 3 other dimensions were new to me and they're very fascinating, which is the sensing, the body sense experience that Edwin, you were talking about. And the other 2 were outer experiences, which is belonging and being. And when I started researching about these 6 dimensions, it started just expanding the way, and it's right now looks like that we're all talking about different dimensions in different words.
Okay, so when you learned about this, it was very meaningful for you because he has 6 dimensions that adds to those core 3. It's sort of dimension, the feeling, being sensitive, and then 2 other ones of sort of going out and belonging and being. I think it was or the other dimensions. And it sounds like that gives you sort of a map, an orientation to how to look at things. And what you're seeing here is we're sort of looking at some of these different dimensions.
Yeah, I have a lot more, and I know it's my time, so I feel heard at this point.
I know the feeling. Yeah. So, Bill, if I could.
Listen.
Yeah. So, in terms of empathy and those, the feeling, thinking, and action, I'll hit the stopwatch here. So, with the feeling, I think empathy is about, feeling into, being sensitive to the felt experience of others.
Okay. Oh, so you wanted to say in thinking, feeling, and action, feeling is sensing into the sense of others.
And the thinking, I think is I want to bring in the feeling aspect of thinking. That thinking is a felt experience as well, and to be sensitive to the felt experience of thinking.
So you see that there's a connection between thinking and feeling, and there's the bringing thinking or feeling into the thinking experience.
Yeah, that thinking can be fun. I did a, we did a empathy cafe on the feeling of reason. Like, what does reason feel like, and what is what does thinking feel like, and to kind of explore that it has thinking has different different feelings to it, and reason has different feelings. So again, it's the sensitivity to felt experience, but to be, the feeling, what is, to have that awareness.
So you're talking about the sensitivity of the felt experience, but also thinking, like you talked about a cafe that we did, what does reasonableness feel like? So every time we have a mental concept, there is a feeling component that goes along with that.
Yeah, like, so thinking, it can be like, oh, this feels, I'm in the thinking mode, and it feels very monotone. It feels emotionally felt monotone, and it's and just feeling that monotone is sort of painful. So it can be, oh, why don't we want to do a lot of thinking? Because it feels monotone, to.
So you're saying that there's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And, I would like more of a feeling of creativity or something else, so there's other, so being aware of that felt experience.
So as you're thinking, as we're talking about thinking here, or at least as you're conceiving it, it feels very monotone, but that's a feeling in itself. And it's sort of like thinking fatigue.
Yeah,
So
it'd be painful.
So you're wanting to bring in creativity to that mix.
And then the other part about the action, I think the role of empathy in action is that there's, if we decide to take an action, that's an empathically negotiated thing. Like, it's like, here's this thing, we want to take action, but it's like, well, what is that action? What is that action going to be? We can use empathy to sort of negotiate what that action will be. So the empathy has a role a big role in terms of action, because you don't just all decide on an action necessarily, but that you need, it's sort of an ongoing negotiation. Well, I'm willing to do this, I can offer this, but what about this and this and this? And so and then you need sort of empathy for that negotiated action. So, yeah.
So you're saying that it's also empathy in action, and that it's or at least a desired component of that, where because you need to empathize in order to agree to some sort of agreement on an action. It just doesn't happen like everybody says, let's raise the flag or something at 5 o'clock, and that's not going to happen. But you could do, if you decide and say, okay, we'll do it, then that happens. And then this feeling of listening and being heard goes throughout. It's constantly iterating.
Yeah, it's a good example. We're going to raise the flag. Well, I'll do this part. I'll go get the flag. Well, I'll go do this part. And then, will you be willing to do this? Well, I'll do that. So it's kind of negotiated how everybody gets together to raise the flag. So there is an empathic listening needed to take the action.
So you're just emphasizing, like, and using that metaphor of the flag, that each person is going to do something according to their skills and desires, and then there's a constant empathic negotiation to actually get the flag raised or to achieve the action or goal.
And the other thing, I'm just in the last 30 seconds, is the sort of the aspect of how do we bring more I would like to bring more creativity into the empathy circle. How do we sort of launch more of a felt sense of creativity, and that's kind of a feeling I would like to have.
Okay, so whereas the discussion gets mental and stuff, and there's like you said, painful, you'd like to bring creativity into that, and then that you feel would transform the experience and become much more energizing and joyful.
Yeah, I'm just sort of sitting with, well, how to add more creativity. So have a lot more to say again, but we got to get back to the full group. So
okay.
Let's see, I need a bio break. Oh, okay, bio break. I just saw your message. So back to the full group, and we'll kind of debrief there.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
So I got about 32 seconds before everybody's back. Looks like everybody's off for the bio breaks. Two seconds, 1 second. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So what we want to do now is take maybe up to a minute for each person to just share, what was your experience, especially what was any value that you came up with that was meaningful, value of a culture of empathy, or just kind of anything else you like to share, in up to about a minute. So I'll just go and select people along here. So Bill, do you want to go first?
I was intrigued by the fact that we're talking about empathy both in the cognitive or intellectual realm, and then the emotional realm, and then the experiential realm. And there seemed to be a constant exploration of, how does empathy play a role in each of those things?
Okay, thanks. Anish?
So what I really liked about today was the deeper exploration of what encompasses empathy, and also the dialogue about different forms of empathy that I was very interested to bring in, and the skills and the willingness, which is the difference, the gap between capacity and capability. I may be willing to do it, but do I have the capability to do it? So these kind of meanderings and discovery was very, very exciting for me. Yeah.
Aoife?
Yeah, it's always very interesting to hear perspectives that you don't necessarily kind of resonate with in your own experience. It just feels very different. So, but then to know that you're in a situation where your experience is, your perspective is going to be listened to and valid. But yeah, I have lots of more questions coming out of it, and I'm quite interested to look at, empathy from a feminine perspective in terms of like sensing how other people feel, and how there can be a lot of dysfunction around that. So
Okay, thanks. Enda?
So I don't have anything to add. It's just a good circle of sharing.
Okay. Jenny?
Oh, well, it's kind of the first time for me doing this, and I got a bit overwhelmed with joy at one point. Something to do with the space when, in this whole practice, when that space between when somebody says something and then it's repeated back, it allows this space that I find very beautiful. And so that's the main thing I'm taking away. It's this sense of beauty in it that I feel really feeling it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia?
Yeah, this was maybe yeah, I really felt that the time went really fast. I almost felt like it became a kind of meditative, the way we talk to each other. And we talked about presence, and that empathy as a form of being more than kind of like doing correct reflections, sort of like being ambitious. It's more about the presence that we bring into how we communicate with each other. And we talked about animals and how they give silent empathy. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this time.
Okay, thanks. Dean?
We looked into the fact that actually doing the practice itself was enabling us to develop a sort of inner resiliency, so that when the strife was happening around us, we could actually be empathic still in amongst the turbulence. So I think the throwaway line was like lifting weights, empathic weights. And it was a brilliant practice, and it was a beautiful space that I shared with everyone else. And I count myself privileged again. Thank you.
Thanks. Pavel?
Yeah, that topic of presence came in and way of being, but we didn't talk much about the values per se, but we really managed to embody the values and live up to them in our empathy circle, being honest, open, and yeah, just the values were demonstrated in the empathy circle. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Andy?
I think what I'm taking away is the awareness that empathy connects with vulnerability, and that one becomes aware of one's vulnerability when things are falling apart. And so the social collapse is such a situation. But of course, if you panic when things are falling apart, then you can actually become really unempathetic. So we need ourselves to train and learn how to be empathetic, even in chaos, so that we can actually help others.
Thanks. Terry?
One of the things I personally took away from our very vibrant empathetic encounter was the ideal that this kind of relating to complete strangers. I mean, I was in a room with 3 people I had never met before, and we ended up in less than 2 hours relating at a level that we all ought to be doing all the time. And it's remarkable to be able to get to that ideal level of connection so smoothly through such a simple process. And we didn't really talk about this a whole lot, other than the ideal that it represented, and a lot of other things just as beautiful. But that's the one thing that I took away from it more than anything else, just personally.
Nice. Sarah?
We had a very good circle. Yes, everyone was fully present for each other. And there was a deep empathy among participants who were sharing some really profound things, such as the vulnerabilities of living during these times, of what I guess Joanna Macy calls the great turning or the great unraveling, and our connection with ourselves and deep feelings regarding future generations, and also towards our gratitude for animals, and thankfulness for animals in our lives. And everyone was really wonderful.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. James?
Yeah, I think the most salient point for me in today's circle was this idea around capacity and willingness, and taking responsibility for my own awareness of where I'm at on my level of capacity and willingness, rather than asking others to do that for me, which is really not possible for them to do anyway. So that's it.
All right, then for me, it was the thinking, topics of thinking, feeling, and action, you know, and how empathy relates to those was something that was sitting with, and also sort of being in a thinking mode versus being in a more felt mode, but the thinking mode is also a feeling, so that the felt experience. So the sensitivity to all felt experience, and that's really what empathy for me is to feel into, which is the root. So to feel into our thinking, the feeling of thinking, to feel into our feelings, and to feel into our taking actions. So, so I'm kind of sitting with that. And so, yeah, so next, what do we have up next is in half an hour, we have our facilitators support group. So you're welcome to attend that. If you're wanting to facilitate empathy circles, you can, in half an hour, we meet the same URL. We share any projects we have on wanting to facilitate empathy circles, so you can come and get support around that. You get 15 minutes to share. Yeah, Aoife, is that a question or?
Yeah, I really want to come to that, but it's just so late at night, and I'm wondering, could I come for an hour, or is that just
Oh yeah,
not?
it's like you can come for 15 minutes. It's drop in, so as much time as you want. Yeah. So, and then we also have tomorrow, if you're part of the XR, we have our XR. You don't have to be part of XR. It's but it's Extinction Rebellion. We have a empathy cafe around the different values and principles, and demands for XR. So that'll be tomorrow at the same time that this group was. And I think that's, I don't know, what else do we have? I don't know, Bill or anyone, is there other topics that we should mention? Did I leave out something? Oh, there's after this call, if you're a facilitator, if you want to stay just to sort of do a debrief, that would be, yeah, great. Yeah, that's, so that's, I think that's it. Yeah, Terry.
Terry has his hand up.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask, you mentioned the XR Cafe, Empathy
Mhm.
Cafe, I think you called it. Is it the same URL tomorrow?
It's the same URL and the same time as this one. Yeah, so you're welcome to come, even if you're not part of Extinction Rebellion. You're welcome to come, because in the Empathy Cafe, there's the topic, which is going to be on the fourth demand that they have. But you can talk, yeah, I see a smile. There's a big contention around that. So would hope for some of the facilitators can come, because you're going to need facilitators. If I don't know what turnout we'll have. I see Dean's a little, so, but you can always talk about whatever's alive for you, right? So you can talk about pretty much anything that's up for you.
I'm sorry to dwell on this, but is it an empathy structure or process just like we did today?
It's just like today, yeah. It'll be exactly like today.
Okay, I'll try to be there. I already have 2 meetings on the calendar tomorrow, but I'll see if I can fit this in.
Cool. Yeah, and bring your friends next week. Next week we'll continue this discussion. Yeah, yeah, Aoife. Oh no, you're just waving at something, or saying bye. So, okay, then yeah, next week we continue with this. At some point we're going to shift into, we'll have a little bit of a presentation on one of the topics, being empathy, mutuality, or any of the other topics. It'll be kind of an open discussion again for next week about the values. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you. And if you're a facilitator, stick around. Yeah, thanks.